Welcome to the Shade Chronicles, an anthology-style podcast featuring short works of fiction and serial prose, specifically with a sci-fi and horror flavor. Your hosts for the podcast are Derek Leftridge and Lawrence Trokey.
Hi, this is Derek Leftridge.
Hi, this is Lawrence Trokey, and thank you for spending your time with us. Let's get started with our first story.
Risley's Beacon by Derek Leftridge. The only people who use the steps that extend up the inside concrete support of lighthouses these days are the people who do routine maintenance to these safety guides on the open seas. This story is about Ryan Churn, who is one of these individuals. Ryan is in his late 20s with a messy mane of red hair. He's a rabid shutterbug and learned about photography from his grandmother, who after retirement got deep into taking photos of the inlet and even had a darkroom in their home. Ryan's grandmother would take him along with her on her photo shoot exhibitions and taught Ryan how to take pictures and develop them the old school way. Ryan began living with his grandparents from his early teen years because his mother and stepfather moved around a lot. His mother wanted him to get an education, so the decision was made for him to stay with his grandparents, his mother's parents, and go through school. 2 years ago, his grandfather of 89 years died in his favorite place, their garden. And then last summer, his grandmother passed away from complications of pneumonia, and that was a tough time for Ryan. After both grandparents were safely in the ground, he sold the home, bought a small boathouse, and began a career as an artist. He specialized in painting of Risley Inlet and other inlets in the area. Business owners, wealthy individuals, and travel companions commissioned him to do his art. He makes an okay living, but luckily has a large trust fund from the sales of his grandparents' property and money they put away for him. Lighthouses are automated now and mainly maintained by the Coast Guard. Ryan has been with the Coast Guard for the past 2 years. He will never experience the things the old keepers did in their era when they spent day and night at the lighthouses. Those times were lonely and frightening, especially during the incredible storms on the open seas. Even though he will not experience them, Ryan hears all about the old days from the retired keepers like old Jan. Jan owned and ran a lighthouse on a neighboring inlet many years ago, but he is retired now and runs a fish stand on the pier in the mainland. On the third Thursday of each month, Ryan gets lunch at the stand and then heads off to the Risley Lighthouse to do his maintenance work. The light from the Risley Beacon has helped save many lives over the years, and many sailors have commented that the light is the brightest they have seen all up and down the East Coast. Not only is the light legendary, but the legend that accompanies it is one of ghostly mystery. And old Jan loves telling it often and to whoever will listen to him. The legend goes that on the first fog of the season, the ship captain not only notices the extreme beam of light that Risley Beacon casts over the sea, but on the observation deck of the lighthouse looks to be a young woman standing. Even though the woman is just a silhouette, you can see her hair blowing in the sea breeze, and all the sightings have been in early morning hours when the fog is the thickest. After taking all of this in, Ryan assumes it is only salty sea talk from old mariners. He then gathers his gear. He boards the ferry for the peak of Risley Inlet. Normally, if Ryan finishes his work early, he will take pictures of the inlet from the base of the lighthouse to capture the beauty of the landscape so he can paint it on canvas later at home. Today, Ryan decides to take his pictures from the ferry at the lighthouse. As the ferry approaches the area where the old sailors have noticed the woman on the observation deck, he looks through the viewer and snaps a few pictures. Back home, while developing the pictures of the lighthouse, Ryan takes a glimpse at the calendar. Tomorrow is the first Tuesday of the month, and by the old Sea Dogs calendars, the first fog of the season. After finishing the development of the picture, he hangs it up to dry, and then he goes to bed for the night. Around 3 a.m., Ryan is awoken by a bright light shining on his face. Struggling to focus, he notices that the light is coming from the picture of the lighthouse he took. This can't be because the light was not on when he took it. Then from all around him, he hears a woman's voice that sounds like she is forever away, but yelling, and all he can make out are the words, "Sea and me." The light then goes out, and the woman's voice is gone. Ryan, feeling a little startled, assumes he was dreaming, and then he curses Jan and his stupid ghost stories and returns back to sleep. Ryan wakes up early the next morning, and once his head clears, he remembers the incident last night, so he decides to see for himself if there is anything strange with the Risley Lighthouse, and maybe even a woman at the lighthouse. He quickly gets ready, grabs his stuff, and rushes to the dock to catch the 5 a.m. ferry. Jogging up the hill to the loading dock, Ryan sees the seafarer securing the ferry to take off, and he increases his speed and begins to call out, "Hold up, please." The seafarer stops and motions him to the deck and ferry. As he gets his breathing regulated while looking at the ocean, Ryan sees how the inlet fog is thick, and how incredible Risley's lighthouse beacon is illuminating and cutting through the soupy fog like a glowing blade. After landing on the dock at the inlet and Risley dock, Ryan runs up the hill to the lighthouse. He takes a look at the observation deck at the top, but sees nothing. He opens the main door and climbs a spiral staircase to the observation area. He pauses as he gets to the last step of the staircase and softly laughs to himself for believing the old mariner's stories and thinking he would see a ghostly woman on the deck. Surprise, there is no one there, and the light looks like it is working perfectly. He shakes his head in disappointment of himself and then turns around to go down the stairs to take some landscape pictures and wait to catch the next ferry off the inlet and head back home. As Ryan steps towards the first flight of steps to descend them and leave the lighthouse, his foot connects with and nudges an old cigar box on the floor. Not remembering seeing that there before, he cautiously bends over and picks it up. He slowly lifts the lid because it is obvious it is many years old, and as soon as he does, the mustiness lofts out. Pulling his head back quickly to catch a breath, then looking into the box, he sees an old warped photo of the Risley Lighthouse from probably hundreds of years ago. From the look of the clothes the keeper and his wife were wearing, the era was the mid to late 1800s. Looking again into the box, there is something else. It is an old folded piece of paper. Ryan is careful when removing it from the box and when unfolding it because the paper is brown and brittle with age. The letter looks to be from a man named Clyde to what seems to be his wife, Ida. Ryan reads the letter aloud. "Dearest Ida, I have gone to the mainland to retrieve a gift for you. Storms are coming this evening, so I'll return as quickly as I can to get home before the dark. Keep the light bright for me. Love, Clyde." After the name Clyde is spoken, something in Ryan's mind tells him to slowly look up in the direction of the frontmost section of the observation deck. Blinking to clear his vision to make sure he is seeing what is there, he sees a blurry form. The form begins to change to a more smoky and clearer shape that resembles a person. Even though it is somewhat transparent, the figure morphs into what's more like a female figure with long hair standing outside on the observation deck, facing away from him. The opaque woman figure is leaning on the railing, and without hearing anything, Ryan gets the idea from the posture of the figure that she is screaming at the sea. She has a death grip on the railing and is hunched over, straining her neck in the foggy air. Frozen in his tracks and riddled with chills, Ryan hears a faint scream, and the tone of the words is clearer than the ones he heard at his home when he woke up in what he thought was a dream. The ghostly female figure turns away from the sea to face Ryan, and a distant but distinct howl of pain is heard, saying, "Show him." At the same time, the horn of the ferry startles Ryan out of his stunned stupor, and he drops the cigar box onto the floor by his left foot. Realizing that, Ryan quickly bends over and picks up the box and gathers the items that fell out. He stands up and readies himself for a quick descent down the stairs. With a quick look back to the deck to make sure he saw what he thought, Ryan does not see the woman any longer on the outside deck. Ryan turns to his left, ready to quickly head down the stairs and get the hell out of the lighthouse, when he is face to face with the ghostly woman who is inside the lighthouse now and 3 inches away from his face. She looks not at him but straight through him and screams in a loud whisper, "Show him." Nearly filling his pants with fear filth, Ryan stumbles back and lands on his butt on the edge of the first step and then slides halfway down the steps on his back while looking up at the area where he just saw the legendary woman of the Risley Lighthouse. He regains his footing on the first landing, gets upright, and without looking back clears the remaining 25 steps in about 6 steps. At the bottom, he rushes through the main door, down the hill, straight to the dock, and onto the ferry where he stops to calm himself before his heart blows up out of his chest. Once home, Ryan is still shaken up and sits on the side of his bed. As soon as he can breathe somewhat normally and the sweating has stopped, he begins to think about what just happened. As he stares at the picture he took of the lighthouse yesterday, he does not feel fear but a weird calmness as if what he went through today was not something to be afraid of. And then a lightning bolt of thought flashes through his brain and causes him to jump up and head over to the easel. He removes the painting from last night and places a new canvas on the easel and begins to paint with insanity and does not stop until early the next morning. A thin, gray-haired man in a suit and tie, along with a woman in her late 50s, are standing at the first-level lobby of the Risley Lighthouse, which is no longer an active lighthouse but a museum. The man explains, "Now if you look over at the area above the front entrance, you will see the exact painting Ryan painted the night he saw the ghost woman." The woman responds, "Oh yes, I see it. Sir, what does the painting mean? What did the boy Ryan figure out that evening?" The man in the suit begins, "If you look closely, you can see the painting of the Risley Lighthouse has a woman standing on the observation deck." He continues, "And a man in a rowboat safely landed on the shore below." Continuing, the man says, "You see, the man from the letter, Clyde, died at sea when coming back from the mainland with his wife's anniversary present. After seeing the splinters of wood from his boat and a damaged present float up on the shore, the wife Ida jumped off the observation deck to her death on the jagged rocks below. She did not want to be of this world without her husband, whom she loved dearly." "Okay, I think I understand," the woman says. "The ghost of Ida wanted someone to make sure she and her husband were together. Ryan figured this out and painted a picture of the lighthouse with her seeing her husband safely on shore, like it was supposed to be, on that frightful night of their anniversary." "Correct," the man confirms. "The words 'see me' were her way of telling Ryan to show her on the observation deck, and 'show him' was to have him safely on the shore below. In a way, this brings them together forever, if only in a painting." With a tear welling up in her eye, the woman says, "That's a beautiful story. Who told it to you?" Straightening his tie and trying to stand straight and as proud as he could in his old age, the man announces, "I am not just your tour guide for the Risley Museum. I am Ryan."
Attention Shade Chronicle podcast listeners. The merchandise store is now open. You can find the merchandise store on the merchandise tab on the Shade Chronicles website, which is at theshadechronicles.com. Find premium t-shirts, hoodies, tank tops, travel mugs, ball caps, and more at the Shade Chronicles podcast merchandise store. We now resume your regular programming. Previously on the Shade Chronicles. He didn't notice the figure approaching him from behind. He didn't hear the footsteps in the wet grass or notice the presence of another person nearby. His focus was solely on the photo of Lizzie embedded in the stone of her grave marker. "What if I told you I know who the killer is?" Emotions threatened to overtake Ted as he scanned the room. He looked at the photos. He saw the personal objects the killer had taken from his victims before he fled the scene. His determination was now solidified. The son of a bitch was gonna die tonight. "What's your plan?" Ted asked Abaddon. "If you are convinced, then I propose we lay in wait for the killer to return home. Then, with the element of surprise, we take him. After, if you wish, we can either turn him into the authorities, or..." Abaddon's voice trailed off, not speaking aloud what both men knew to be the most likely outcome. The Shooter, Part 2. Abaddon showed Ted how to load the assault rifle he chose and how it operated. Then he turned off the lights inside the house, and they waited in the room off the garage for the killer to come home. In less than half an hour, they heard the garage door open. Ted moved into position. When the door opened, the killer turned on the light inside and then saw Ted. "Hi," Ted said, and then slammed the butt of the assault rifle into his face. The killer fell to the floor unconscious. He was dressed in coveralls, regular work clothes. Abaddon explained the killer had worked on the maintenance crew of the mall 5 years ago. He knew the mall inside and out, and that was how he was able to escape capture by the police. After the mall closed, he moved on to another maintenance job at a nearby shopping center. They drug his body to the back of the killer's car. Abaddon popped the trunk of the Ford sedan, and Ted hefted the killer's body into the trunk. He didn't quite fit, but Ted didn't care. He slammed the trunk lid down repeatedly until it finally caught and latched. Ted drove the killer's car to the parking lot of the shopping mall. Abaddon followed in his car, and when he arrived, he instructed Ted to drive around back to the receiving area on one end of the building. From there, Abaddon went inside and opened one of the loading bay doors. He had a flatbed cart ready to carry the unconscious body of the killer. Ted removed him from the trunk of his car and dropped him like a sack of concrete on the metal cart. Abaddon closed the dock door behind them and went over to a series of electric panels mounted on the wall near the doorway. He flipped a switch and lights came on all around them. "Are we sure this place is abandoned? No security guards?" Ted asked. "We are alone here. The property manager is too cheap to hire security to watch his building. We will not be disturbed." Abaddon seemed to have thought of everything. They rolled the cart to the main courtyard of the shopping mall. Although closed for some time, there were still some fixtures and shelving Ted could see in the storefronts as they passed. Many of them had security gates shutting off the storefronts from the main mall area. I had another thought. If this guy knows this place so well, what if he finds a way out before I can get to him? Ted was worried the killer might escape. A fair point. Most of the access ways to the outside have been sealed. As I said, the landlord is too cheap to hire security to guard his property, so he took extra steps to lock the building down. It is quite secure. I was still able to find a way in, but it is the only way in or out. I will watch it and prevent the killer from escaping through there. As you see, many of the stores are locked with security gates, so he will only have access to the main hallways. Again, Abaddon seemed to have everything under control. Ted was starting to feel uncomfortable about how easy all of this was coming together. Just then, they heard a groan coming from the killer. He sat up, reaching for his head. He was surprised by the bloody gash he found on his forehead. Ted and Abaddon stared at the killer as he swung his feet around and sat on the edge of the cart, holding his head in both hands. "What the fuck did you do to me?" he whimpered. "Only what you got coming to you, and there's more to come." Ted reached down and pulled a name badge off the killer's coveralls. "Edmund Black Bull, eh? They call you Eddie for short?" "Who are you?" Black Bull answered, ignoring Ted's question. "Well, Eddie, I'm the father of a beautiful girl you killed 5 years ago when you came here and shot her and 11 other people in cold blood. And now I'm going to set things right." Ted racked around to the chamber of the assault rifle. "Now get up. We're going to play a little game." "Fuck you, man. I ain't doing nothing." A gunshot cut Black Bull off. The sound reverberated throughout the halls of the shopping mall. The bullet exploded between the feet of the killer as he sat on the cart. Whoa, wait a minute," Black Bull pleaded with Ted. "I said get up." Ted stared at the killer with stone-cold hatred in his eyes. "All right, sure." Black Bull did as instructed. He was unsteady on his feet, probably due to the concussion he received from Ted's blow earlier. "So here are the rules of our game, Eddie. You're going to start running. I'm going to give you a 10-second head start, and then I'm going to come after you. That's it. Easy, right?" The killer didn't wait for further instruction. He started stumbling off down the main hallway, looking desperately for a way out. Ted glanced over at Abaddon to see him nodding in approval. Again, Ted thought he saw a faint smile briefly flash across his face. "Don't let him past you," Ted said, and then he started off after Black Bull. Ted was impressed at how fast Eddie made it down the main hallway to one of the tributary hallways despite his injury. Still, with most of the storefronts closed off with security gates, Ted could see him running from one storefront to another in the distance, hoping to find one that he could get into. Ted raised the weapon and looked down the sight. He fired a couple of rounds that just hit above the killer's head. That caused Black Bull to fall down and scramble to hide behind a large planter in the middle of the hall. "You gotta do better than that, Eddie." Ted teased the killer as he casually strolled towards him. Black Bull, sensing Ted approaching, jumped up and ran to an entrance to a service hallway. Ted took a few more shots at him, not even aiming, but more just tormenting his victim. Then, for a moment, Ted sensed someone nearby, just over his shoulder, but when he turned around, no one was there. Using Ted's distraction as a chance to escape, Black Bull scrambled back down the service hallway and ran past Ted towards the main hallway. He must have found the service door entrance was locked and realized he couldn't get out that way. Ted turned and walked after Black Bull. He saw him running down the main hallway again, so he fired a few more shots at him. The bullets landed near Black Bull, but still none found their mark. He ducked again and ran towards another storefront. This one had the security gate down, but it was not locked. Black Bull raised it enough to crawl under it and got into the store. "Shit!" Ted exclaimed and ran after Black Bull. He pushed the gate up even more and ducked under it to enter the store. Once inside, he held the gun up in front of him and scanned the area, looking for Black Bull. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw too late the form of Black Bull jumping down on him. Black Bull slammed into Ted, knocking him down. Then he picked up a piece of shelving and beat him with it several times. Ted rolled over and tried to protect himself, but the piece of pipe had done some real damage. When he couldn't take it anymore, he twisted and fired the assault rifle wildly, hoping to hit the killer. It caused Black Bull to stop his attack, but then he grabbed the rifle and jerked it from Ted's grip. He spun it around and took aim at Ted. He pulled the trigger, but the clip was empty. A disappointing click was all he got for his efforts. He threw the rifle at Ted and was going to lunge at him to beat him with his bare hands, but Ted had pulled a Smith & Wesson 9mm from his jacket and fired at close quarters. The bullet hit the killer in the gut, and he fell backwards. Then Ted could hear him scramble towards the entrance and exit the store. Ted was hurting from the beating he took. He slowly got up to his feet and winced at the pain. Suddenly, Abaddon was there. Ted hadn't noticed him coming in the store. "You have got to go after him now," Abaddon demanded. "You must push beyond the pain and get back to the task. You cannot give up now when you are so close to bringing justice to this murderer. He killed your daughter. Are you going to let him get away with it?" Abaddon was practically yelling in Ted's face. "I shot him. He won't get far," Ted reassured Abaddon. Then he ducked under the security gate and followed Black Bull. As predicted, Black Bull made it about 50 yards outside of the store and then collapsed onto the floor of the main hall. He had crawled a few more yards, but then had to rest. His breathing was labored. He crawled into a kid's play area and lifted himself up onto one of the benches. He sat there bent over, holding his gut, trying to stop the bleeding. That's when Ted caught up to him. "Well, Eddie, it looks like we've run out of time," Ted said, making Black Bull raise his head and look at him. "Thanks for playing my game, but it looks like you lost." Ted raised the pistol and pointed it at Black Bull's head. Black Bull just stared back, a mask of pain across his face, as he waited for the end. Ted looked back into the killer's eyes, trying to find the last bit of motivation it would take for him to end this man's life. For some reason, it was harder than he thought, and he hesitated. Abaddon was there again. Ted did not see or hear him approach. "What are you waiting for? Do it! Take your revenge! Do you not remember how much he took from you? What you lost? Repay him for the pain he caused you before it's too late." Ted straightened his arm, ready to pull the trigger. This man had hurt him to the point it destroyed Ted's life, his chance at happiness, and the losses he suffered were some he would never recover from. Why not pay him back for all of that? "Daddy?" He heard the voice, but he wasn't sure who said it at first. It sounded like a voice he knew, but had not heard in such a long, long time. It squeezed his heart to hear the sound of it. He looked around and then saw her. Standing in the shadows along the wall, he saw Lizzie. I don't believe it. Honey? Is that you? How? Don't do this, Daddy. This won't fix anything. It only causes more pain and suffering. Hasn't there been enough of that already? Lizzie walked slowly into the light. Ted didn't recognize the clothes she wore. They were a light color, lightweight material that looked like a gown or a robe. He had trouble seeing details because his eyes were filled with tears. "God, baby, I missed you so much. I am so sorry I couldn't stop you from..." His voice trailed off. "I know, Daddy, but you can stop this from happening. You don't know who you've been dealing with, but I can help you." She walked up to him and gently wiped his eyes with her hands. "See?" She pointed at Abaddon. Ted gasped when he saw Abaddon's true form. Instead of a gray suit and hat, Abaddon was now wearing a hooded gray robe, tattered and stained. His face, still obscured some by the hood, was sickly, pale skin, pulled tight over a pointy nose and bony cheeks. Age lines and wrinkles littered his face. It reminded Ted of images of one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse he had seen rendered in the family Bible. "Oh my God," Ted gasped. "He is not here to help you. He feeds on despair, pain, and suffering. Your pain and your suffering. He brought you here tonight to watch you lose all hope and destroy yourself. You can't let him do that to you. You have to start being strong for yourself and for me." Abaddon spoke with a raspy voice. "This is everything you've wanted for years. This is all you have thought about. You have it in your very grasp. Take it and be fulfilled." Ted looked away from Abaddon back to Lizzie. She was smiling at him and holding his face in her hands. "I know you'll do what is right, Daddy. You can make this right. I love you." And then she slowly faded away right in front of Ted's eyes. Lizzie, please don't go, please." He started to cry, realizing she was gone. After a moment, he looked at Abaddon. "You can go now, too. I don't need you anymore." Abaddon, too, faded away before him, and then he was left with Black Bull, who appeared to have passed out. He was slumped over on the bench. Ted reached down and felt his pulse. He was still alive, but it would not be for long. Ted reached into his coat pocket, found his cell phone, and dialed 911. Within minutes, police and emergency services arrived at the mall. EMTs quickly started working on Black Bull, trying to stabilize his condition. The police took Ted into custody. Ted was found guilty of kidnapping and first-degree assault. There were a few other charges, but they were dismissed due to Ted's help in finding the mass shooter and turning over evidence against him. Ultimately, Ted was sentenced to 2 years in state prison. 9 months into serving his sentence, Ted was in the prison cafeteria, sitting with the other prisoners eating lunch. He looked up from his meal when he noticed someone approaching. He saw the scar across the man's forehead and knew instantly who it was. Black Bull sat down across the table from Ted. "Fancy meeting you here," he said with a smile. "What are you doing here?" Ted asked in an even tone. "Well, apparently when you kill a bunch of people, this is where they send you." The joke fell on deaf ears with Ted. "But seriously, folks, I'm in town for one of many murder trials. Even though it's a foregone conclusion I'm headed for the chair, they still want to parade me out in front of the press and the victims' families, like I'm some sort of goddamn freak show. You know, give them a chance to glare at me and cry and call me names like that's gonna fix anything." Ted didn't say anything, and Black Bull continued. "So I was transported here for holding for the next few weeks until the trials are over in this town. And then I'll be shuffled off to the next town until they run out of victims, I guess. But while I'm here," Black Bull leaned over the table, "I thought I'd pay a little visit and let you know how much I appreciate you putting me in this fucking hole." "It could have been worse," Ted offered with a smile. "I would have preferred that to this shit show. So I wanted to let you know I have one more thing to do before they light me up like a Christmas tree. I'm going to thank you for everything you did for me by slicing your fucking throat. After all, what's one more body on the pile?" He smiled at Ted, but there was only hatred in his voice. He stood up and said, "See you around the schoolyard, Teddy boy." Black Bull turned and walked away. Ted watched him go. He made it about halfway through the cafeteria when another prisoner intercepted him. "I know you. You're that Black Bull guy. Mass killer, right?" the prisoner asked. "So what, you want a fucking autograph?" Black Bull retorted. "No, just this." Suddenly, the prisoner produced a shiv and repeatedly stabbed Black Bull in the gut before he could react. Other prisoners nearby quickly moved away from the attack. After the prisoner had sufficiently ended Black Bull's life, he dropped the shiv and raised his hands, while prison guards ran up and shackled him. Others tried to help Black Bull, but it was too late. The shiv had found an artery, and Black Bull bled out on the cafeteria floor. Ted saw the attack and was shocked. He would later learn the prisoner that killed Black Bull was the brother of one of the mass shooting victims at the mall. He had heard Black Bull was being held at the prison for trial and couldn't resist the opportunity for revenge. As the guards moved in to establish order, Ted saw a guard on the far side of the room. He wore a ball cap with the insignia of the prison on it, which slightly obscured his face. For some reason, he wore sunglasses even though he was inside. The gray color of his uniform made his skin seem very pale. Ted thought he saw a slight smile cross the guard's face before he turned and left. So we're back with another story from Derek, Risley's Beacon. I just wanted to say I really enjoyed this story. It was like classic ghost story kind of thing, and really appreciated the descriptions of the scenery and what was going on with the situation there. But why don't you get into some of the details of where you came up with the story, the lighthouse and all that kind of stuff? You don't live anywhere near a lighthouse.
No, I do not.
What inspired you to talk about the lighthouses?
Well, I think it's been something that, since liking art like yourself, I've always liked the art of lighthouses, and I did a lot of pen and ink drawings, and I did many of lighthouses.
I like the whole scenery of it, the landscape, and then you got this big towering lighthouse right there that looks really cool and creepy at the same time. And so I thought it'd be really cool to have a story that would be having some type of lore to it that had to do with the lighthouse, but then also we had to get to it to a point of being able to have a character that was interested. The Coast Guard thing comes into play, and he's able to, relate to it that way. And I assume that there's probably tons of horror stories out there with lighthouse keepers, and they had to have seen some crazy stuff as they were doing their jobs and living out there in a certain area. So I thought that would be interesting to kind of see the life of, but kind of like, the life of, and it was a bad life apparently for these two. However, at the end of it, we want to bring them back together.
Yeah. Well, in recent memory, there's been stories about lighthouses and the sea and Coast Guard and that kind of stuff. So, it's not like this is all that much of a throwback. I mean, you're really being very contemporary with the rest of the fiction that's out there in regards to this kind of thing. But I just thought it was a classic ghost story. I mean, I just loved how it all unfolded, and seeing that ghostly image from afar on the lighthouse. I mean, that's what inspired me in the artwork to come up with what I did.
Right.
And I just thought it just was a well-rounded ghost story that you could tell around the campfire.
Yeah, I liked it. It was pretty tame compared to things that I have written before and that I will write in the future. But it was something that I thought was a good, like you said, a good ghost story. It was something that I've had in my little collection of writings for a long time. So it had to be brought up to kind of the modern, and I guess that just was so old that it became modern again in a sense because of the whole lighthouse thing, because I think they're all automated now to this point. I don't even know if there's anybody that really checks on the automation part of it.
Right.
But yeah, it is something that was a traditional ghost story that I really like, so I'm glad you liked it.
Yes, absolutely. And I've climbed the steps of a lighthouse down in St. Augustine, and man, that's no easy task.
I've never done that, but I can imagine.
And the view is great. It's awesome, by the way.
That's cool.
So anyway, that is Risley's Beacon there by Derek Leftridge.
Okay. Next one, we finally got Shooter Part 2. And I was kind of held... I was happy how it went with the father. Okay, the story going with the father, getting in contact with the shooter would have bad. And I kind of see that this is going to start going crazy, and it did within the mall. And it was good. It kept me entertained. I liked it a lot. And the decision to not go with it, I liked it. And it was good that I'm very happy it didn't end that way because I really wanted to get my satisfaction in this person getting his just dues. But leading up to the part before the very end, I did like all of that kind of leading up to it. Kind of took me back to the mall, which I haven't been to one in forever.
Yeah, right.
And it was something that I really liked. So what is it that what is it that you liked writing about this portion of the story?
Sure. So this goes to the overall concept of the story of this person who lost his daughter during this terrible, violent event, mass shooting. Again, this problem that plagues our country in particular, and wanting to see this man somehow have a chance at getting some satisfaction, some retribution for this terrible crime that was committed. But then, I'm also a guy who likes good guys. I have trouble rooting for bad guys. I can appreciate bad guy stories where they're the lead and they have qualities about them that are, less than ideal, but are funny or interesting or whatever. I can get into that, but ultimately I'm rooting for the good guy.
Right.
That's just how I'm built. And when I saw the end of this story, I'm like, Ted could kill this guy and satisfy that need for revenge and all that. But I didn't want to see Ted go down that path. I wanted him to find a different way and be the good guy. And so this idea of Lizzie appearing to him in the place where she was murdered and saying, Daddy, you're better than this. You don't have to do this. This is not going to fix anything for sure, which is true. An eye for an eye doesn't fix anything. It's just, getting back at someone for some evil that was done to you. You have to be better than that. You have to rise above that. And in this day and age, we need more of that, that message of rising to the occasion, being the better person, not because it's easy, but because it's the right thing to do. So that's why I led Ted with this, not taking the life of the killer, but I still wanted that Twilight Zone Stephen King kind of ending, and that's why I tagged on the ending where he's in prison, he's serving his time, he's halfway through his sentence or whatever, and he meets up with the killer again. And, it looks as though the killer is going to get his revenge on Ted.
Right.
For putting him in this position, but then the killer is taken out by someone else, and you've got a Baden in the corner just, smiling and approving the whole thing and knowing that he set this other plan in motion to finally get retribution against this guy because that's what he craves, that's what he feeds on. So
Right.
That whole image of that story and how it ended just seemed appropriate, and I was really excited when I thought of it. Hopefully, it made sense and everybody enjoyed it. So
I enjoyed it. I think that you took the burden of doing the bad off of the dad.
Yeah.
However, you did give us readers the best of both worlds by letting him be a hero and still the one guy getting killed. And if anybody, I appreciate it.
Well, there you go. Thank you very much for that. Thank you for that. So that wraps up this episode of the Shade Chronicles, and coming up next is a preview of the next episode. We hope you're enjoying these, and if you have any feedback for us, feel free to email us or contact us through our Facebook page. You can email us at shadechron@gmail.com. That's SHADECHRON@gmail.com. Or you can contact us through our Facebook page as well. Send us a message. Let us know how you're enjoying the series, and let us know if you've got any suggestions for future stories. So with that said, we're going to turn it over to the sneak peek. Thanks again, and we'll catch you next time. Next time on the Shade Chronicles.
AC-21 slows his crawl through the ventilation system and then hesitates as he realizes he is over the conference meeting hub, since he can see light coming up a couple of feet ahead of him from a grate in the air duct. They are having a secret closed meeting about a crucial decision involving both of their planets and their inhabitants. While flying through space at Mach 7.89 speed, the shuttle begins to react to turbulent bouncing, dropping, and shifting, causing individuals on the shuttles to cautiously look around or down, and many to grip their support harness for security.
He sat across the table from her, anxiety building as he watched her eat the last bite of tiramisu. It was the conclusion of a $750 dinner at the best restaurant in town. Alex loved his wife Maggie with all of his heart. He did everything he could to make her happy for the first 13 years they had been together, and, up till now, he never quite got it right. Gehenna smiled at Alex, but it was not a warm, friendly smile, more ironic. He went on, "With my help, I can navigate you around the obstacles that stand in your way. Together we can achieve the desires of your heart. You need only trust me and allow me to be your guide." He reached out and offered Alex his hand. Alex stood up and took it. When he did, a wave of something passed through him. What it was, he wasn't sure or could even describe. It was like a trembling, nervous feeling that had passed from his head to his toes in a flash and then was gone. Thanks again for listening to the Shade Chronicles. For comments or inquiries, you can contact us at shadechron@gmail.com. That's SHADECHRON@gmail.com. Visit us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can also get more information at theshadechronicles.com. The Shade Chronicles podcast is the creative property of Derek Leftridge and Lawrence Trokey. Stories in this podcast were the sole creation of Derek Leftridge and Lawrence Trokey, respectively. Any attempt to replay for broadcast or distribution portions of any episode of the Shade Chronicles without the prior written consent from the creators and/or significant compensation is strictly prohibited. Shame on you for even thinking about it in the first place. Thanks again for listening. Tune in next time for another episode of the Shade Chronicles.